I used to think that 5 minutes was nothing, a blink of an eye. But then I found my father's ancient magic watch, and I realized that 5 minutes is enough time to live 1,000 lives, or to lose your soul entirely. My name is Zibo, and I am the girl who murdered time.
The story starts with a girl named Zibo. To anyone passing her on the street, she looked like any other 24 years old girl trying to make it in the big city. She wore a faded hoodie, her hair was usually tied back in a messy knot, and she always seemed to be looking at her phone, checking the time. But Zibo was carrying a weight that most people couldn't see. When she was only 10 years old, she lost her father. It happened on a Tuesday, normal Tuesday. Her father was a clockmaker, a man who spent his life surrounded by the steady tick-tick-tick of mechanical hearts. He had promised to take her to the park after work, but he got busy. The father told her, "Zibo, just give me 5 more minutes." Those were the last words he ever spoke to her. A sudden heart attack took him before those 5 minutes were up. Since then, Zibo became obsessed with time. She felt like time was a thief that had robbed her of her father's last hug. She grew up feeling like she was always behind, always rushing, and always losing. In her small, cluttered apartment, Zibo worked as a freelance designer. She sat under a single lamp, surrounded by half-empty coffee cups and sticky notes. Her boss would call and scream about deadlines. Her friends would text her to come out, but she always said, "I don't have time." She was living in a race she could never win. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning out a closet of her father's old things, Zibo found a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in a piece of purple velvet, was a pocket watch. It didn't look like the expensive ones. It was made of dark, dull brass, and it had no numbers on the face, only a single silver hand. Zibo wound the dial. Click, click, click. Suddenly, the sound of the rain hitting her window stopped. Not because the storm ended, but because the droplets were hanging in midair, frozen like tiny diamonds. Zibo gasped. She walked to the window. A pigeon was frozen in flight just inches from the glass. She looked at her phone. The digital clock was stuck at 4:22 p.m. She stepped outside into the hallway. Her neighbor was frozen mid-sneeze. Zibo realized she held a miracle. She could stop the world. For the first time in 14 years, Zibo breathed. She didn't have to rush. She went back to her desk, finished 3 days of work in what felt like hours, and then took a long, peaceful nap. When she woke up, she pressed the button again. The rain splashed against the glass. The pigeon flew away. The world moved on, and no one knew that Zibo had just stolen an entire day for herself. At first, the watch was a blessing. Zibo became the most productive person in the city. She would freeze time to study, to clean her house, or to just sit in the park and watch the frozen people. She felt powerful. She felt like she was finally winning the race against her father's ghost. But then things started to change. Zibo began to use the watch for everything. If a guy at a cafe was mean to her, she'd freeze time and pour his coffee on his lap. If she felt sad or lonely, she'd freeze the world and walk through the quiet streets, talking to the frozen statues of people. But there was a catch, a detail Zibo didn't notice at first. While the world was frozen, Zibo was still living. She was still eating, she was still breathing, and she was still aging. One morning, she looked in the mirror and saw a wrinkle near her eye that wasn't there yesterday. She realized she had spent weeks in frozen time, while only minutes had passed for everyone else. She was 24, but her body was becoming 25, then 26. She was growing old alone in a silent world. The turning point came on the anniversary of her father's death. Zibo was supposed to meet her mother for dinner. Her mother was getting older, her hair turning gray. Zibo arrived late, as usual. Her mother looked at her with sad eyes and said, "Zibo, you're always miles away. I feel like I'm losing you too." Zibo felt a panic attack coming on. Her instinct was to reach for the watch. Just 5 minutes of silence, she thought, just 5 minutes to calm down. She pressed the button. The restaurant went silent. Her mother was frozen with a sad expression on her face. Zibo stood up and walked outside. She walked for hours through the frozen city. She looked at a couple frozen in a laugh. She looked at a child frozen while dropping an ice cream cone. She realized that these people were happy or even sad because they were living in the moment. By freezing time, Zibo was skipping the life she was so afraid of losing. She looked at her hands. They were shaking. She realized she had spent more time with frozen people than with her own living mother. She was a ghost. She was more dead than her father ever was, because at least he had lived his minutes until they were gone. Zibo walked back to the restaurant. She sat across from her frozen mother. She looked at the brass watch. It felt heavy now, like a lead weight. She understood now why her father had never used it, even though he must have known what it was. He knew that a minute only matters because it ends. With tears in her eyes, Zibo took the watch and placed it on the floor. She took the heavy chair and smashed it down. Suddenly, the noise of the restaurant rushed back in. The clinking of forks, the hum of voices, the smell of cooked food. "Zibo, are you okay?" her mother asked, reaching across the table to touch her hand. Zibo didn't look at her phone. She didn't check the time. She gripped her mother's hand tightly. "I'm here, Mom," Zibo whispered. "I'm finally here." Zibo never got those 5 minutes back with her father, but she realized she didn't need them. She had today, and for the first time in her life, today was enough.